I thought my inner voice had died, or at least that he had buried it so deep inside me that I would never find it again. But the truth is, no voice ever disappears. It only goes quiet until the day you need it. And on that day, the day everything inside me began to break open, it came back. Not screaming outwardly, but screaming inside me with a force that seemed to come from every version of me that had survived in silence. Night had arrived early, as it always seemed to in that house. There was something about that place that made every hour feel heavier, as if time itself were made of lead. He was sitting on the couch, watching television, and I walked through the living room as if crossing a minefield. The difference was that this time, I knew the explosives no longer had the same power, but my body still remembered. He asked for a glass of water, not asked, ordered. That dry, authoritarian voice cut through my chest like an old command programmed into my spine. And I went, out of habit, out of reflex, not out of years of conditioning. But halfway down the hallway, at the exact moment my feet touched the midpoint, something inside me screamed so loudly that I almost stopped walking. It wasn't a scream of despair. It was a scream of identity, a scream of truth. I am not a servant. The words didn't arrive as a complete, rational thought. They came as an impact, a rupture, an explosion. As if every cell in my body was tired of shrinking every time he raised his voice, I stopped in the hallway, with the empty glass in my hand. And I felt my legs tremble, but not from fear. It was strength returning. And when strength comes back after years of being suppressed, it comes shaky, fragile, but still. It comes. I stood there for a few seconds, breathing deeply, feeling my heart pound as if it were being revived. The dim kitchen light illuminated half of the hallway, leaving the other half submerged in shadow. And I felt exactly like that, half still trapped in my old self, the other half rising towards something new. He shouted from the living room, "How long is this going to take?" Before, that sentence would have cut me open. It would have stolen my breath. It would have triggered the conditioned instinct to run to him, to fix his discomfort, to apologize 1,000 times. But this time, no. This time my inner voice was much louder than his. I didn't answer, not right away. And that small delay, that silence that used to mean punishment, was my first internal declaration of freedom. I went to the kitchen, filled the glass, and when I came back, I walked slowly, not rushing, not justifying myself, not anxious to prevent an outburst. I simply walked at my pace, in my body, in my awareness. He noticed. Of course he did. When I held the glass firmly and handed it to him, his eyebrows furrowed, as if he were trying to solve a puzzle that had always been simple. I was changing. And change was the thing he feared most. "What is this now?" he asked, suspicious. I didn't answer, not because I was afraid, but because, for the first time, I had nothing to justify. He drank the water while looking at me as if he were staring at cracked glass, trying to understand where the fracture was, where the threat was, where the beginning of the end was. And that was exactly what he was seeing, the beginning of the end. My inner voice kept speaking, no longer in screams, but in clear, steady words. Enough. Enough of accepting the unacceptable. Enough of shrinking your soul to fit someone else. Enough of surviving instead of living. I sat on the opposite end of the couch, keeping a distance I had never allowed before. And in that simple gesture, in that small space of just a few steps, there were years of silent courage finally finding room to exist. He turned off the television, turned to me, and asked what I had been expecting. "What's going on with you?" That question cut through me like a blade, but a blade that didn't wound me. It opened me. Because in that moment, I realized something essential. I no longer needed to be afraid to answer, but I also no longer needed to exhaust myself trying to explain. The change in me wasn't for him to understand. It was for me to live. I took a deep breath, looked around the living room, That room that held so many versions of me crying in secret, so many nights it hidden, despair, so many attempts to silence my own voice just to fit into the quiet he imposed. And then, finally, without raising my voice, without shaking, without asking permission, I said the sentence my courage had been trying to bring out from the beginning. Nothing, I'm just tired. His reaction was immediate. Not shouting, not physical violence, but instability. Because when the woman who always obeyed says she's tired, she's not warning you. She's declaring war on the cycle. He tried to minimize it, tried to laugh, tried to call me dramatic, tried to control the narrative as always. But I didn't absorb it anymore. While he spoke, my inner voice shouted another sentence when I had never dared to say to myself before, you have the right to leave. And when you hear that inside your own chest, there's no going back. I stood up from the couch before he even finished speaking. I went to the bedroom. I didn't slam the door. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just sat on the bed and felt something shatter all the invisible chains that held me for so long. My inner voice, for the first time in years, was alive. And it said, without hesitation, the time is coming. If this story speaks to you, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next. And be sure to watch the next video, where the journey continues in the next section, or perhaps in the next series, as that inner voice turns into action.